Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Social Hotelier podcast with me, Sam-Erik Ruttmann. Meet Portia Hart, a visionary entrepreneur redefining hospitality with purpose. As the founder of Blue Apple Beach, a boutique hotel in Cartagena, Colombia, and the Green Apple Foundation, Portia has turned her passion for sustainability into a powerful movement. From pioneering glass recycling initiatives to championing regenerative travel, her impact extends far beyond her beachfront property, with bold commitment to environmental and social responsibility. Portia proves that business success can go hand in hand with positive change. Join us as we explore her inspiring journey of innovation, resilience, and creating a legacy that uplifts both people and the planet. Welcome, Portia, and thanks for joining us today.
Sam-Erik, thank you so much for having me. I'm always delighted to get to connect with people on the other side of the world, as I'm mostly based on a small island. Well, it's wonderful to share our story.
Yes. First, for the audience to understand, exactly where are you located?
So my primary hotel, Blue Apple Beach, is on an island called Tierra Bomba, which is about 20 minutes away from Cartagena. I do also have a second property in central Cartagena in the middle of the UNESCO Heritage Walled City. But I have to say I do spend most of my time running Blue Apple, which is a slightly more complicated operation.
Okay, but very good. How did you get started? And I'm so curious to know that how in the world did you come up with the name Blue Apple?
I mean, how I got started, I wish I could tell you that, I had a plan. I studied languages and linguistics at university, and we were just talking about the weather, you and I. I know you spent several years living in Asia and got accustomed to warm weather. I studied in Japan and in Edinburgh, Scotland, and got rather too accustomed to cold weather, and it finished me off. So when I graduated, my primary ambition was to work somewhere where the sun shone. And I was fortunate enough, and this was back in the day, which I now realize my age, when you used to send your CV in an envelope to people that you'd never met with a cover letter and hope that somebody might call you back and give you an interview. And I sent my CV off to places all over the world with good weather. And I was fortunate enough to get a job working as a secretary in a yacht brokerage company in Monaco. And I didn't think twice, much to my father's chagrin. He couldn't understand why he'd invested so much time and money in my education for me to disappear and be a secretary in the south of France. But I stayed there for 8 years. I started as a PA and I ended up as the COO of a yacht brokerage firm there. But I realized, I think I turned 30, and Monaco is a strange and wonderful place. And obviously I was deeply privileged to have spent a lot of time there in my 20s. There was a sense that it's not the real world. And I had a feeling that I would either leave or I was going to sort of turn into somebody who thought that the only thing that mattered in life was the watch that you wore and the car that you drove. And a friend of mine married a Colombian and said, I'm headed off to Bogota to live with my wife. And I think I'm going to start a company doing anything. Do you want to come and help? And I thought, why not? These opportunities don't come along that often. I didn't speak any Spanish at the time. I wasn't sure what the company that he planned to start would do, although he worked in property development, which I thought didn't sound too dissimilar to yachting. I arrived in Bogota, had my 2 suitcases. I'd never been to Colombia before. And pretty promptly, his wife realized that she actually couldn't stand moving back to Colombia. And within 6 months, they were gone. I believe they still live in Monaco. But I was rather too embarrassed to go home. I thought, well, I've set myself up for this adventure. I've thrown a leaving party. I've quit my job. I've uprooted my life. So I'll hang around in Colombia maybe for a year. I've got some savings. And if at the end of the year, all I've managed to do is learn a language, then that will have been something. And I'd been working 8 years solidly since leaving university. So I thought that was a pretty legitimate plan. And I traveled all over Colombia and I eventually arrived in Cartagena. And at this time, it was 2015, Colombia was really coming out of its civil war. Publicly, it was becoming a place that was considered safe to travel to. And Cartagena, which is an incredibly special city, was blowing up. But one thing I noticed was that there was no beach culture. So there were beautiful boutique hotels in the old city, and people would hop on a boat and they would go to the Rosario Islands, where there are white sandy beaches and this turquoise ocean. But there was no real sense of beach club the way I'd lived it in the south of France. And the hotels there were quite basic. Nobody had air conditioning, nobody had hot water. A wine list was a distant dream. And I sort of thought to myself, I have no idea how to run a hotel. I have no idea how to run a beach club, or a restaurant. I've never cooked anything in my life, but I do know what the customer is looking for. And I kept coming back to Cartagena city after a disappointing day in the islands and bumping into other foreigners like me who were enjoying the city but frustrated by their experiences in the beaches. And I met a chef at that time, a Colombian chap who was born in Ibiza and had worked in the Balearic Islands, had worked in the south of France, understood European beach culture, and was Colombian. And we sort of got together and said, let's try this mad idea of setting up a beach restaurant and seeing what happens. And, here I am 10 years later. So it was a sort of a completely unplanned, very organic, I would say emotions-led journey. The Blue Apple as a name was really something that we came up with in about 5 minutes because we realized that the task of setting up this business was going to be so difficult that we couldn't afford to waste any time on things like names. But we knew that we needed a name in English because we knew that foreigners don't speak very good Spanish and kept forgetting names in Spanish. So every time I spoke to somebody who was American or European who was traveling around Colombia, and I would say, what have you really enjoyed? So, you stayed in this great place. What was it called? It was called kind of Casa. And they kept forgetting. So I thought, if I have a name in English, people remember it. But I also really want Colombians to come to our beach club. So I better have a name that's simple English and doesn't exclude anyone. And I thought, well, everybody learns the colors pretty early on when they learn a language. I remember the first word I learned in French was green. And we're by the ocean, so that's blue, so that's easy. And I thought, well, Colombia is really famous for fruit. So Colombia has over 3,000 varieties of fruit. But pretty much the only fruit that doesn't grow here is the apple. But everybody knows the words. And I sort of wanted to choose a name that was authentic in its recognition that I'm not from Colombia, and I wasn't starting something that was particularly in homage to Colombian culture. And so we sort of wanted to say, well, yeah, we are, we're a couple of foreigners setting up this thing. And that was really how we came about with Blue Apple, something that was easy to remember.
Wonderful. I mean, it's such a fascinating story that you have almost several accidents happened in a chain. And then here you are many years later, you're sitting on having 2 properties. You've done so many things. But it's always interesting to find out of someone who, like yourself, with that tremendous experience, what was the moment you realized that what seemed to be impossible could actually work?
It's a brilliant question. And I think it's a series of moments. And I would encourage anyone who's considering stepping into the world of being your own boss, being an entrepreneur, not to overthink it. And one of the things that I often realize now is that if I'd known what was coming up and if I'd given it too much thought, I probably never would have done it. Because there are hundreds, if not thousands, of obstacles and reasons not to take the risk. I think the day I realized it was possible was probably when I spoke to my father and I told him before we'd opened, look, Pops, I'm out here in Colombia. I still don't really speak the language. I mean, I've got a bit more Spanish than I had. And I've met this chef who seems to know what he's doing. And I've spent a lot of time having lunch on the beach. Because that's what we used to do from the office. We used to go down to the beach and have lunch every day in Monaco. So I do really know what someone's looking for, but I've never run my own business and I have no idea what Colombia is all about. And my father, who I was expecting to say, don't be ridiculous, don't throw your money down the drain, come home immediately, go and get a normal job, do something sensible, said to me, I can't believe in the world today that you've managed to find this opportunity. It is so rare. The barriers to entry are relatively low. Back then, and I'm always very honest about this, we started Blue Apple. There were 3 of us, 3 partners, and we started Blue Apple with $25,000 each. So it was a startup cost of $75,000. And my dad said, you can't start a business anywhere for that amount of money today. But you're telling me that there are people who are willing to spend $50 on lunch. So you've got a willing client base. As far as I can understand, you've got no viable competition. Sure, you don't really know what you're doing, but you know what you want to achieve. And if you get it all wrong, it's going to cost you less than an MBA would. And I think, when your 70-year-old father tells you to go ahead and do something that sounds completely mad, it's a first sign that maybe it's not as mad as it sounds.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, so I know you have been very keen on things relating to sustainability, and you created all these activities and it's as part of a movement. If you could share a little bit about, was it something that comes natural to you, or thinking about regeneration of an area, and how did you go about thinking about those things, and how did you incorporate this into your resort at the time?
One of the first things that I'm always keen to point out to people is that I did used to work in the yachting industry. So that is servicing sheikhs and oligarchs and tech billionaires. And the yachting industry is not, and certainly when I was there, was not known for its environmental credentials. I certainly did not come into the world of hotels with an idea that I wanted to do things in an environmentally considerate way. And if I'm really honest, I'd never given much thought to my environmental footprint. I was fortunate enough to grow up in the UK, where when I threw something away, someone came and took care of it, and I never had to give it much thought after that. When I flicked a switch, the lights came on. And when I opened a tap, enough water came out as what I needed. And then I lived and worked in the south of France, and it was all about excess. And I remember, having conversations with charter brokers where they would be frantically trying to ship 40,000 bottles of Evian from France to Malaysia because they had a client on a yacht that only bathed in Evian water, or somebody who decided that he wanted to propose to his girlfriend and he needed 70,000 red roses so that they could fill every cabin on the boat with roses in case he decided to do it, in one of the cabins. And so shall we say that thinking about sustainability wasn't in my frame of mind, wasn't something that came naturally to me. And living and working in Cartagena and working especially on this island, Tierra Bomba, it was a real slap in the face. And the reason I'm honest about this is because one of the things that stopped me at the beginning from saying I'd like this hotel to be an eco resort and I'd like to be sustainable was that I felt that it was all quite difficult. And I felt it was sort of unattainable, and that you had to be an expert and you had to be a really good person. And I was none of these things. But what happened within a few months of opening was an irate neighbor came around, and he was pretty cross, and he was sort of shouting in Spanish, and my Spanish was a bit better by then. I could tell he was angry, and he was talking about rubbish. And he was saying to me that I was throwing, the hotel was throwing our rubbish into his land. And I said to him, well, don't be silly, sir. I've got a couple of chaps here who I pay to take our rubbish away. We had no municipal waste collection on the island at that point. And I could sort of see out the corner of my eye some of my team, I won't say smirking, but with slightly amused expressions on their faces. And pretty quickly, we realised that these two blokes had come around from the village and taken my money week after week to, inverted commas, dispose of our trash. And disposal meant, chucking it in the next door neighbour's garden. And sure enough, the neighbour took me over and I saw this sort of huge heap of really revolting rubbish. And it had all come from my property. And it was the first time in my life that I saw how wasteful, firstly, this kind of idea of a luxury first world lifestyle is, and secondly, just day to day. And I realized, we can't carry on throwing rubbish in our neighbour's garden. So I've got to get it back to Cartagena because that's where the landfill is. And getting it back to Cartagena is really expensive and I don't have any money. The business is operating on a shoestring. We've just blown all of our savings starting it up. We've got absolutely no working capital. And to put all of your rubbish in a boat and drive it to the mainland is a very, very expensive way of dealing with it. Much more expensive, by the way, than anybody in a hotel in London is spending to get rid of their rubbish. And so we had to get smart. And that was where sustainability really began at Blue Apple. And it wasn't driven by a desire to do things the right way. It was driven by a desire to solve a problem, a need, in an affordable way. And that meant reducing the amount of rubbish that we created. And as we started this journey, I realized really how disconnected my life had been from everything that makes sense. And I realized it's not necessary to be wasteful. I realized it's pretty silly to buy a plastic bottle that you're going to use for 30 seconds and then throw it away if you have to buy the bottle and then you have to pay to throw it away. And I think that was really the paradigm shift certainly for me and for our business, it wasn't, we want to be sustainable because we're kind of green heroes. It was, this just makes way more sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So what were the things you had to kind of take a look at the waste management of your property radically. How did you go into some recycling of things, or how did you go about this? Because I think there's a...
I mean, it's funny, I always end up talking about waste management. If you say to someone, yeah, I live in the Caribbean and I run a hotel, and people always imagine that you must be sipping pina coladas and sunbathing all the time. Well, in fact, I dedicate quite a lot of my time to thinking about and talking about waste management. So the first thing we did, we already had a scheme at Blue Apple called our artist residency program. And artist residency was the world's biggest euphemism for, please come and help us do stuff that we can't really afford to pay you for. And it started off when we needed art for the walls, and we said to local artists and traveling artists, you might not be able to afford to spend a night in a 4-star hotel, and we can't afford to buy any art, but if you fancy doing an exchange, we're up for it. And a girl called Caitlin applied to our artist residency program, and she happened to be, and the universe always gives you what you need, a waste management expert. And she had worked on a team in Toronto, sort of establishing Toronto's municipal waste management and recycling scheme. Extremely knowledgeable, essentially a waste engineer. And Caitlin came down and spent a few months with us, and she taught us how to be, certainly from the very beginning, how to not bring things onto the island that you don't need in the first place. So how to start with your supply chain of just buying stuff that doesn't come in loads of unnecessary packaging. And then Caitlin did an audit around Cartagena of where all of the recyclable materials go and if they end up really being recycled. And this was a steep learning curve for me. I learned that recycling is a business. Nobody recycles out of the goodness of their own heart. Recycling makes money. And if it doesn't make money, people don't do it. So we discovered that electrical goods, most hard plastics, metals, were all recycled in Cartagena. And actually, Colombia has quite an advanced network of recyclers. And so that was really good. We were able to get rid of paper, cardboard, plastic types 1 and 2, any metal, tin foil. We were able to cut quite a lot out. And at the end of the month, we were left with these kind of 2 big heaps. And one was food waste, which you can imagine, working in a hotel and a restaurant, you've got a lot of it. And one was glass waste. And the thing about glass and food is that they're very heavy, which makes them expensive to transport. And they're quite dangerous or unwieldy. So food rots, it smells, it gets full of flies. It can be a source of disease if it's not managed properly. And glass breaks and it cuts people. And they both make products when they're processed that aren't particularly valuable. So glass turns back into sand, and food obviously turns into compost. And essentially, once you do the maths, if you're putting glass or food onto a boat and then into a lorry and you're transporting it hundreds of kilometers away, your end product will be a loss maker. So no one was willing to take it off us. And we went to Cartagena's recycling center and we saw a massive pile of glass there. And we said, what do you guys do with all this glass? And they said, well, we're sort of supposed to recycle it, but we can't find anyone to do it. And it makes us a loss. So we leave it here until the room gets full. And then we send it to landfill. So we decided not to send our glass there. But at this time, the minimum wage in Colombia, so this was 2018, the minimum wage in Colombia, which is monthly, I'm sorry, I can't do it annually because we do everything monthly here, was 650,000 pesos, which back then was a little bit over $200 a month. And that was easily what we would be spending to put all this glass onto a boat and send it to landfill. So I sort of looked around with Caitlin and we found this company in New Zealand, a beer company of all things. And they again had a problem which they needed to solve. And it was what to do with the beer bottles that so they had a beer company, they would sell the beer and then they would take the bottles back and they would refill them. But if a bottle was chipped or it was broken, it was useless. And they developed a little machine, which is really not much bigger than the stool I'm sitting on now. And you stick the bottle in the top and it's kind of like a bottle blender. And it's got a rotary blade and it crushes the bottle into sand. And then they had another amazing machine, which is centrifugal force. And it spins all this sand around and it has 6 different levels. And you end up with 6 different grades of gravel and sand. And they were selling this gravel and sand to the construction industry, who were using it for building. And this is where I learned that construction uses sand. Actually, the construction industry is the biggest consumer of sand in the world. And in certain parts of the world, there's actually a shortage of sand. You have to use freshwater sand. You can't use sand from the beach to make good quality concrete. A lot of that comes from quarries, not great for the environment. A lot of it comes from riverbeds, not great for the environment. So this was a really, really neat solution. And we said, I think it's Picasso, good artists don't copy, great artists steal. So we got in touch with them. We said, we absolutely want to steal your idea. We bought a machine, and that was where it began. We hired a person to run the machine, and we went from there. Today, 7 years later, we now have we've got an industrial machine. We've got 3 glass recycling centers around Cartagena. We employ 12 people. We've processed over 500 tons of glass waste. We've built things. I mean, it's really taken on a life of its own. We work currently with about 30 to 40 businesses, and we're looking to scale up to work with about 200 businesses in Cartagena to recycle their glass waste. That was sort of how we pivoted. Yeah. And I now don't know if that answered your question, but
yes, you
now
did.
You know more about glass waste than you ever did before.
Well, I'm learning all the time about you, but quite a bit about waste management and also about this recycling. Also, I mean, there are 2 things I have in mind I want to ask you as a follow-up. One is relating to your suppliers. Another one is the guest perception. First is the suppliers. How did did you find a way to educate the suppliers how they should, what kind of format they should bring the goods to you, or were they all wrapped in plastic, or how did you go? What is the system in Colombia or Cartagena?
Well, the funny thing is, and this is something else that I've learned time and time again living here. Generally, when you work with someone local and small, they tend not to be wasteful. They're not sending products for thousands of miles, so they don't need to fill them with preservatives and wrap them in loads of ecopor, loads of polystyrene. They don't need to put them in loads of packaging. Quite often, if it's somebody in your community, they send you something and you can send them back the empty packaging, or you can work out between you, or hang on, I'll buy a cool box and I'll give you the cool box and I'll buy another one, and we'll just sort of interchange cool boxes, and that's how you'll deliver me fish. And we went through an exercise. So the pandemic, we were closed for 7 months. That was government decree. Colombia had one of the harshest lockdowns in the world. So we were sitting there on the island, sort of working out, well, firstly, if we could survive. But secondly, if we were to survive financially, if we were to reopen, working out how we could be a better business. And I stumbled across the B Corp framework. And I don't know how much you know about B Corp, but essentially it is a set of criteria, rules, a framework to apply to the capitalist model in order to harness all of the good things about capitalism, so efficiency, innovation, profit-driven, and use them to solve problems which capitalism otherwise might ignore. So I started reading about B Corp, and I thought, well, it'd be really fun to start the process of turning Blue Apple into a B Corp, and a lot of it is about supply chain. And I realized that, every time we ordered something on Amazon, which might have been easy because it was one click, we were giving power, money is power, to someone in another country, someone with whom we didn't really have very many shared values, someone who we didn't think really needed to have any more power. And we were also taking money out of our economy, the Colombian economy, and we were sending it to another one. And we thought, well, hang on, wouldn't it be better if we spent all of our money? And I'm quite open with numbers. I mean, we're not a publicly traded company, but at that point, pre-pandemic, we were doing revenue of a little over $1 million a year. And if $1 million a year stays in Cartagena, and there are 1,000 businesses in Cartagena doing that, well, that's a lot of money staying in Cartagena. If all of us are buying 40% of our stuff on Amazon, that's a lot of money going to Jeff Bezos. So we started to look for suppliers that were local, and we started this point system where we would allocate points to the supplier based on lots of criteria, such as where they were. The closer they were to our business, the better. So if they were on the island, maximum points. If they were in Cartagena, pretty good points. If they're in Colombia, not bad. And if they're overseas, 1000 points. And we also analysed, are they independently owned? We sort of realised that the world looks better when a more diverse group of people have power, because they're able to represent people that look like them and live their lives. So when I say diverse people, I do also include women, people of colour, people from less socioeconomic developed backgrounds, people perhaps who haven't been to university. So we gave points if the business was run by anyone from those groups. We gave points if the business owner was able to visit our establishment and we could have a chat with them, because that meant, to answer your question, that we could have conversations with them about the kinds of products that we wanted to receive, how we wanted to receive them, why we were doing things the way we were doing. And we were able, within about a year after reopening, to get to the point where we were spending in 2021, I think it was 85% of what we spent was staying in Colombia. 60% of it was going to independently owned businesses. 30% of our spend was going to businesses that were owned by other women, people of color, people from lower socioeconomic groups. And what I discovered is obviously it's easier to have a conversation with a bloke down the road about how you want to receive your fish, for example, than it is to pick up the phone and convince Jeff Bezos to do things differently. And we've had chats with suppliers where we've asked, are all of your employees on proper contracts? Do they all earn at least the minimum wage? Do they have healthcare? And I can say every supplier that I work with pays their employees fairly. And I couldn't get Jeff Bezos to do that. So that's where we were with suppliers. And then with customers, I have to say I was hesitant. And I say this because I remember when I worked in Monaco, and then I remember going to a travel show in Marrakesh a couple of years before the pandemic, and hearing people say sustainability means not luxury. So people hear the word sustainable, eco, they just instantly imagine it's going to be uncomfortable, it's going to be dirty, these people don't clean their sheets, they don't have air conditioning, and they're going to lecture me, and it's probably going to be vegan, and everyone's going to be wearing hemp clothes. And I was sort of like, I don't want to talk about sustainability. And I remember at the time, my PR company was pitching us for a story for the Telegraph newspaper in the UK. And the Telegraph said, whatever they do, just tell them not to talk about sustainability. Nobody wants to hear about it. So we didn't. We just did all this stuff in the background.
Yeah.
But then customers started sort of seeing what we were doing. They were like, why are all these bottles coming off this boat and going into the back of well, actually, we crushed the bottles into sand. And yeah, the cabana that you're staying in was actually built with cement made from recycled bottles. And, yeah, and we've got a little herb garden at the back. Yeah, because all the food waste, we compost it. And, oh, yeah, no, those over there, those are pigs because we couldn't find a pig supplier that met our criteria. So we just grew our own. People were like, this is amazing. And we realized that there was a consumer, not all consumers, but at that point, there was a consumer that was actively engaged in this kind of business. And they could be comfortable, and they trusted us to provide the hospitality at the level that they were looking for. But they were fascinated by what we were doing. And not only were they interested, they were going and staying in other hotels. And when they were served a cocktail, let's say with a plastic straw in it, they were saying, actually, no, I don't want a plastic straw, thanks. And then they were saying to the hotel, you know what, you probably shouldn't automatically put a plastic straw in the drink unless somebody asks you. And we realized that our customers are the best weapon in spreading the word about good business practice, because if they see something they like, the nature of the traveler is they travel all over the world and they share. And so that was when we started to talk a little bit more. We started talking about it on social media and on our website. And I would say we've kept this idea that we're not here to judge. We've got loads of things to do better. I still use lots of boats. We burn fossil fuels in our boats to get to and from the island when we're far from perfect. But the idea is to get a little bit better every day and to really enjoy it. And then what you're sharing is joy, not criticism. Right. And we're not trying to make anybody else feel bad. Yeah. So that's how we approach sustainability, how we talk about it with our suppliers, with our customers, and also I have to say with what I could refer to as my competitors, but what I try to refer to as my peers. So we've actually helped 2 other beach clubs in the islands of Cartagena to start their own recycling centres.
Wonderful. I know a little bit about B Corp, and I know there is quite a stringent requirement to qualify to be a certified B Corp. How long did it take you to become a part of a B Corp?
We applied in, I think it was February or March 2021 and certified in December 2021. Okay. So it took us nearly a year.
Yeah.
It is very stringent. Honestly, we weren't really planning to apply. We applied by mistake. One of my managers got a bit overenthusiastic when he was going through the self-assessment and he hit the apply button. We originally were using it as a means or a tool to analyze every area of our business, because I really enjoyed the fact that it divides your business into 5 areas and it asks you to consider what your values are, firstly, with regards to each area. So how do you treat your customers? How do you treat your your workers? How do you treat your local community, your neighbors? How do you treat the environment? And then interestingly, and this was the one which I think was toughest for us, and I think it's tough for a lot of small businesses, how do you administer all of this? How do you bake it into your corporate governance so that all of these practices aren't just the whim of one person in the business, but they're kind of baked into the way that you do things? So how do you come up with policies and make sure those policies are shared among your team? So it's kind of the side that you could call bureaucratic. We've tried to make it always useful. And I sat with a lot of the questions that B Corp asks. And what I find interesting about B Corp is it doesn't judge you. So, okay, if you get fewer than 80 points, you don't qualify, but it isn't really about pass or fail if you get more than 80 points. And Blue Apple, I think, hilariously, the first time we certified was the lowest qualifying B Corp in the history of the organization. We certified with 80.1 points. So I'm proud of the fact that we were the first island resort in the world. And I'm also proud of the fact that we managed to scrape in with 80.1. I try not to be embarrassed about that.
No, not at all.
I think we just recertified a couple of months ago, and we certified with about 126 points, which now puts us in kind of the top 5 hotels in the world.
Wonderful.
And I love that B Corp is that. It's a journey, and it asks you questions like, and this is the one that stuck with me, as a multiple of the lowest earning person in your business, what does the highest earner take home? And for a lot of founders, some of us are employed in our businesses, some of us aren't. Some of us are employed with, sort of a nominal wage, and then we take dividends. And the first thing I thought when I saw this question was like, I wonder if I say based on my wage, or if I say based on the dividends that I take out plus my wage. And then I realized that what B Corp isn't doing is giving me a set of criteria. It's asking me to think about fairness. So it's asking me to consider, what were the risks when I started my business? What was I jeopardizing? And after a certain amount of years running it, have I recovered those risks? Has that risk gone away? What are the responsibilities I'm carrying as the highest earning person in my business in relation to the lowest earner, who I know perhaps is not carrying a lot of responsibility and perhaps is not taking a lot of risk, but they're certainly giving me a lot of time, and they are fundamental to my success. If I didn't have them in my business, something wouldn't get done and I wouldn't be able to operate. And then B Corp gives you a multiple choice, and I can't remember exactly what the answers are, but it says, is it 1 to 5? So, let's say your lowest earner earns 1. Does your highest earner earn somewhere between 2 and 5? Is it 6 to 50? Is it 51 to 200? And it went on. And I think the top answer is, does the highest earner take home 1 million times more than the lowest earner? Which to me was laughable. And then, of course, I went back to thinking about my friend Jeff Bezos. And I thought, how do I go to sleep at night? What's the number for me where I feel comfortable? And I came to a conclusion. For us, that number is 20. So at that point, I made a commitment that in a year, I would never benefit from Blue Apple to a multiple of more than 20 times that the lowest earner in the company benefited, because I felt that I could then sit down and talk to that person and tell them how much I earned and not feel embarrassed or ashamed or like I was taking advantage. And those are the questions that B Corp puts to you as a founder. And they're challenging, but I like that you get to come to your own conclusion. Look, 20 is the number for me. Yeah. And for Jeff, it's 1 million.
Yeah.
For somebody else, it might be 5.
Yeah, very good. I mean, I think this is very fascinating, and I think the audience will appreciate. And I hope they will. Who are listening to this, that you send some questions, because I think this is very important. That if you don't know anything about B Corp, I think it gives a credibility to your hotel organization, and because it's quite, as Portia now mentioned, it's quite stringent, and you have to really know what you're doing, and you have to do a lot of thinking to make things right. How is it about from the customer point of view? I mean, people are talking about travelers are now seeking experience that align with their values. Do you think, or are you witnessing any true shift in consumer behavior, or is it just a particular group of people who are traveling to places and appreciate the type of things such as sustainable travel, or is it still a kind of a niche market?
It's difficult for me to answer really truthfully in terms of data backing, because obviously I only have 11 rooms. So I'm a pretty niche product. What I can say that I think indicates a trend that's wider than my own niche is that whenever I speak to a journalist, and I've worked in hospitality, obviously, through yachting as well for more than 20 years now, and I've worked with PR companies throughout that time. And 20 years ago, journalists wanted to know, what are the luxury features? What carat gold is the plating on the taps? And tell me all of the mad and amazingly innovative ways that you guys can get your clients to spend money. And today, when I talk to a journalist, be it a travel journalist or even a design writer, mostly what they're interested to know is, what are your values? How is your work aligned with them? How can you, or when I write this piece, how can I demonstrate that you're a legitimate business and that you really care about the environment and the local community? And so I would say that there will always be a market for comfort and luxury, I think. And we see that, everywhere in the world. But certainly, in my experience, sustainability and regeneration are no longer considered that sort of hemp-wearing avoidance of laundry. It is now, I think, seen as completely legitimate that a property can provide a high-end experience and at the same time operate in a responsible way. And certainly, whereas 6-7 years ago at Blue Apple, very few of my customers chose us for our sustainability credentials. Today, I would say 80 or 90% of the customers with whom I speak have chosen us because we're female-led, because we're Black-owned, because of our B Corp certification, because we're members of Regenerative Travel, because of the work we do with the local community, because they would like to enjoy themselves and at the same time not feel guilty about it and not feel exploitative. And I think in that sense, it's not so much a trend for the sake of fashion. It's that consumers, all of us, we're waking up and saying, why should my pleasure come at somebody else's harm? So when I buy a product, when I travel, when I eat in a restaurant, what's the best way that I can do this for my own enjoyment at the same time hope that it has a positive impact beyond me? And I really hope that that's here to stay. I don't see how it wouldn't, because it's a bit like, you discover that you're doing something nice. Why would you go back to not being nice?
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, it seems to me that you have kind of sparked an entire movement in Cartagena with your initiatives. How has that kind of developed over the years, and what is the community, and how are they responding to this? And what do you see going on in your community and also in the greater, let's say, does it spread out to other parts of Colombia or any other areas?
You never really know quite how far, impact travels. Data-wise, our foundation is operational now in several sites in Cartagena. And we sell our product. So we make, actually, I've got one right here. Feels like Blue Peter. So we make glassware out of old bottles. We have a team of artisan women who do that, and they sell their products now all over Colombia. We're quite regularly asked to consult on projects around the Caribbean and in other countries, hotels that are thinking of implementing some of our procedures. Our supply chain assessment tool has been used by hotels all over the world. I was in Copenhagen in November last year teaching a module on sustainable food supply chains to a group of chefs that work at the Marriott Luxury Collection. So I'd say in that sense, our impact is spreading slowly. In Cartagena specifically, what I am absolutely thrilled by is that good sustainability practice or regenerative practice or responsible practice, however you want to call it, I'm now very agnostic about vocabulary, has become something of competitive advantage. And this, I'm thrilled. We're all in WhatsApp groups, with other businesses, and there'll be people in the islands who have hotels all over the islands. And we used to be competing about, well, I've had the most clients, or I did the biggest sales, or, I've got the most famous chef. And now I quite often see, last month we recycled 100 tons of glass, and then someone else will be like, well, we did 110. And that's really exciting to see, because it means that there's a capitalist reason to do the right thing.
Yeah.
It means that other businesses are seeing that their clients like it. It gives them content for social media. And so I guess if I'm proud, which is a strange feeling, because mostly I sort of feel appreciative, but if I'm proud of one thing, it's that. And this year, which has been super exciting, we started a group of businesses in Cartagena. It's called Nuestra Cartagena. And there are 16 of us so far with a bit of a waiting list to join in. And we've started an international PR campaign to promote Cartagena because there are so many businesses doing things the right way. And I've got my fingers up in inverted commas, operating in a responsible way, serving food that's really healthy, avoiding processed foods, operating with really contributive supply chain models, treating their staff with respect and paying fair wages, that we've now formed a little club. And we just had our first fam trip, and we had journalists from the US, we had 3 journalists from Mexico, and they all left saying, it's a long time since I've been to a destination, not just one property, but an entire city where I see this attitude and this philosophy and these values permeate across the hospitality industry. And so that's, I guess, where I am now, is how do I make sure that that spreads really profoundly across Cartagena, and how do we get that message out to the world?
Right. Okay, excellent. Let's move over a little bit to the social media, because that is something that obviously we both know a little bit about, and we both like it because we enjoy having some presence. But I know as a business owner, you might struggle with balancing the day-to-day operation and the demands of social media marketing. So how do you balance this act yourself, and how do you navigate that challenge?
I should caveat my answer here with the introduction that I don't think that I do a particularly good job. So whatever I say, probably do the opposite. We've been quite slow with all of my brands with social media. I've really struggled with it. I love websites. I love text. I like static information. I find social media to be a greedy beast that you're constantly having to feed. And actually, a couple of days ago, I interviewed to recruit to the business somebody to help us with social media. And she said to me, it's rare that I sit down and talk to a business owner who has so much content and communicates so little of it across their social media channels. I was very focused when I opened Blue Apple on making sure that we were really walking the walk before we talked the talk. And I think I possibly went a bit too far, in the sense that I built a team of people who were so concerned with doing it and getting it right and being authentic and not greenwashing and not brag, that I've ended up with a team of people that are essentially quite social media shy. And so sometimes I think we do need a bit of a kick up the bum. And so maybe if I answer that question in a year's time, I'll tell you all the amazing things that we're doing. But something that has worked quite well for us, I think, has been that we've always been very authentic and very honest. And we've never talked about things that we don't do. And one of the comments that I hear most frequently from guests is, I honestly don't know why we didn't come to Blue Apple first. And they've been to lots of other beach clubs. And they said, well, we looked at everyone's social media, we looked at the pictures, and, the other places kind of looked a bit sexier than you guys. And then we got here. Firstly, it looks much better in real life than it does in the pictures. Secondly, the service is brilliant. The food is fabulous. We can see that you guys are focused on actually doing the job. And we just sort of feel a bit sad that we didn't come here straight away. Now, that is, on the one hand, extremely gratifying. On the other hand, of course, especially if you're a social media manager, that is incredibly frustrating. So that's an area of focus for us now, is how to strike that balance and how to tell our story without lagging.
Yeah, and the audience will really see through that if you're trying to sell something. Basically, the idea is that you should, in a one way, solve a problem that the customer has before they travel somewhere. And then they start to see that, well, let me take you back to our glass crushing machine. Even that 5-minute story makes an impact of what you're really doing. And because you're telling here now in our conversation here, a lot of things that you're doing. And you can also, by whoever does that, have a mobile device in their hand and they walk around just showing it for 5 minutes. And that goes a long way. And once that's distributed to those usual suspects in the social media, then it will spread very quickly. And then there are also platforms that has been growing that are not bound to algorithm, because the challenge is that how do you make sure that it is distributed? So now there are platforms which don't use, but are only a subscription based and not using algorithm. That means that you have a captured audience, whatever. If they like what you're doing, they will also subscribe to your content. And that's the way I think people are growing into finding out another ways how they can benefit for this. But because you have such a compelling story. I mean, since we've been speaking here for almost an hour, you have every minute you have shared something that could be a 5-minute video about what you're doing on a daily basis, or what your team is doing, or what the community is doing. So there is it just takes, it's a lot of effort for the person who has to do it. It's not, and to hire an agency to do it, I think that they don't quite get it, because it has to be somebody who is in that operation. That's my 5 cents about this.
You're hired, Sam-Erik. You come to Colombia.
Got it.
But you're absolutely right. And I think we are now at the stage where I finally feel confident and comfortable enough to put a phone in someone's hands and say, go off. And the other thing, of course, is, and I think you'll agree, certainly with Instagram, and I think a little bit now with LinkedIn, content no longer has to be as polished as we thought it had to be. So we used to think, well, you have to have a professional video and it has to all look really beautiful. And something that I now see is that actually our customers respond better to something that looks real.
Yeah.
And things that are almost too staged, they belong on the website. So they understand, that's you wearing your makeup and your ball gown and presenting your best self. But your social media, that's you going to the gym and walking about, doing your groceries. And that's who you really are on a day-to-day basis. And I think as a brand, it's nice to have both of those sides out there. Yeah. So watch this space.
And I think, and I noticed it changed radically changed during the COVID pandemic, where you start to see all these videos or conversations where you have the dog crossing the room where the interview is happening, and nobody thought there was anything special with that, or somebody walked in, or the baby crawls in, and it was quite normal. There was nothing wrong with that. Before that, it was absolutely a huge no-no, because you have to have a TV studio perfection with a great backlighting and so on. But now it's the content that matters, and how it's presented in a way. Let me take you in another part of hospitality, which is interesting to get your views on, is that there's a lot of technology in hospitality and hotels mainly. And the technology, what I mean with that, that people had, particularly during the pandemic, people got used to having self-check-in, digital concierges and keyless entries and all that stuff. What is your thought on that? I mean, does that fit into what the Blue Apple Beach is doing, or is it a very distant thinking that you should have that technology in place?
Tech is so interesting. And I had a bit of a discussion with a friend the other day who was talking about progress and how exciting it is and innovation and blah, blah, blah. And I said to him, do you ever ask yourself if this progress is really necessary and if this innovation is really useful, or is it just innovation for the sake of it? And that is really my philosophy when it comes to tech in our businesses. I absolutely love tech. I don't have keyless entry and humanless check-in, because one of the reasons that people come to Blue Apple is because they love people and they want to meet my team. And we still have old-fashioned keys because it's an island and anything electronic is bound to rust or oxidize or get too salty. But that said, I mean, we, since day one, when we couldn't afford to put telephones in the rooms, have been using WhatsApp for room service. Very popular with our customers. When they check in, we give them a link. And if they want to join the room service group, they do. And then 95% of our customers join, and then they can just do everything they want via WhatsApp. We use AI. I'm a big fan of AI. I've done a little bit of research into also what the environmental impacts of AI are, because I know there's a lot of stuff out there about AI using a lot of water and using a lot of energy. And as far as I understand, without having kind of dived really deeply into it, AI on the scale that most of us use it is no more water and energy intensive than watching YouTube videos or binging a series on Netflix. We have AI assisting our front desk team, and that doesn't replace a person. That facilitates a person being able to leave the desk and go and have more human interactions with our guests. So there's definitely been tech that has been extremely useful for us. We have Colombia is famous for its absolutely absurd bureaucratic systems. And, one of the things that Colombia likes to do is to track the locations of foreigners wherever we are. There's an amazing tech app that lets us do the online check-in and automatically register anyone with immigration so that we don't have to have a person doing data entry. So I'm always open to new forms of tech like that. In Townhouse, I have smart rooms. So you can turn the AC on with your voice. You can turn the TV on. I absolutely hate it. Every time I go into a room and it starts talking to me, I freak out. I just want a light switch. I'm very analog. But a lot of our customers really love it. So now we've set it up so that you can choose, do I want my room to be smart, or do I want to just be able to touch the light switch and the remote control myself? So yeah, we're open to it and we enjoy it, but we never let it take over the original vision. And for me, hospitality, in our sense, I'm not an airport hotel, I'm not a transit hotel. Hospitality for us is about experiencing new cultures, meeting new people. It is about creating temporary communities wherever you are in the world and feeling connection. And I think tech can help with that, but I don't think it's going to replace people. We will have no robotic waiters anytime soon.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. They would rust before that, not too long. So,
believe me.
I have two more questions before we wrap up, and I think you have touched on many of these things. But one question that I like to ask all my guests, besides what we talked about, what other trends do you see happening in hospitality that hoteliers should take note of now?
The one that I talk about all the time with my own team and I see happening in other countries, and quite often I would say, Cartagena is a small town, Colombia, it's a relatively small country in the world of tourism. Our numbers are nothing like the numbers that you see in Italy, France, the States. So we're not always at the forefront of trends. The one that I'm seeing is alcohol and newer generations that aren't looking to drink in the same way, if at all. But it's no longer acceptable to just palm them off with a Coca-Cola or a concentrated orange juice. So I'd say my bar staff are getting way more creative. We're making our own kombuchas, we're making our own kefirs. We've got cocktails, mocktails, but that are not an afterthought. They're actually, designed from the base up to not have alcohol in them. A colleague of mine who works in another company, so I say an industry colleague, she is creating already in Colombia her own alcohol-free cocktails. So she's taking things like the agave plant and she's making alcohol-free tequila. So that's a trend that I'm seeing, and I think it's because we are seeing people who are more perhaps health conscious. And the other one which goes hand in hand with that is food. And there I am really pleased to say that we were ahead of the curve. But this idea that a kitchen shouldn't really have, if you're paying for professional staff to make your food, there shouldn't be any processed products in that kitchen. There shouldn't be a bottle of ketchup, or barbecue sauce or processed bread. Everything should be made from scratch. And that's something that I advocate quite strongly for. If I travel, I will not go to a restaurant now where they're serving me supermarket bought food. I expect everything to be made from scratch. I expect them to know the origin of, for example, if they're serving animal protein, I don't want to be vegan. I don't want to be vegetarian, but I want to know that the meat that I'm eating is ethical. I want to know that the animal didn't suffer unnecessarily before its death. I want to know that it wasn't fed antibiotics. I want to know that it wasn't fed corn that was the cause of deforestation in the Amazon. And I think that kitchens and therefore hoteliers now have to have much more robust answers when they talk about the origin of what's on the plate. And certainly that's something that I see from our clients, and it's something that I do when I travel. I now ask. And of course, this isn't new. This is going back 50 or 60 years to food chains that were more simple.
Wonderful. So lastly, if people are interested to find out more about Blue Apple Beach and the Green Apple Foundation and all the work you do, where can they find you?
We are on Instagram, even though I'm not very good at it. So that would probably be the easiest, at Blue Apple Beach. You see, very easy to remember. At Townhouse Cartagena, at Green Apple CTG. And then we also obviously have websites, or you can find me on LinkedIn, and there's a link to everything that I do there. Or honestly, if you just pitch up to Cartagena and say Blue Apple, to almost anyone in the street, they'll know that there's that bonkers English girl that showed up 10 years ago and started a hotel on an island with no water, and she's still here. So they'll probably put you in the right direction.
Wonderful. Yeah. And also, this episode, I will be promoting it to Instagram. So they will find you through my channel also, and YouTube and LinkedIn. So we'll make sure that I do my little share to get the word out about you and your wonderful organization. So, well, Portia, I really appreciate that you have joined today. I had a lot of fun having this conversation with you, and I cannot wait to do it again, because I think we have something more to talk about in the future. There are so many initiatives that we can have another conversation. So I hope you will accept my invitation to join me as a guest again.
It's always a pleasure to see you, to talk to you, and it's not one-sided. The reason that I'm able to give interesting answers is because you ask all the right questions. So thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to the Social Hotelier. If you enjoy this episode, please take a moment to leave us a review, give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button and stay updated. And also, if you are listening this as a podcast, please write a review in the Apple Podcast. It would really mean a lot to me. And also, if you write about this particular episode with Portia Hart, mention it was Portia Hart who was my guest. And this would also, I will make sure that she will know about it also. So we have a lot of guests coming up in the future, and we will have a lot of, stay tuned for more thought-provoking conversations. And until next time, take care and keep exploring.